Good afternoon, Baiba.
Good morning, Christopher. We have been talking about our brandLingual memory first shift on LinkedIn for quite some time. But I think that our message is, I don't know, somewhere scattered around all of the content that we are sharing. And I think that it would be super valuable for us to have a conversation about it. And as far as I remember, this idea originally came from your end. Maybe you could bring into your way of thinking about the shift.
Yeah, let's do that. Where to start? Or maybe it was Hazel's idea. Um, I my recollection is it was definitely a collaboration. When we've been working in such a way for so long with a certain mental model, we start to approach everything like a hammer would approach a nail, right? And you have this built-in muscle memory about what's to be prioritized, what are the things that you should be doing first, what are the most important takeaways to take from a project, or even your language starts to get front loaded with a lot of expectations. And then when you start to operate in the messy middle and shift over to more of an evidence-based approach from an intuitive-based approach, you hear a lot of similarities, but you start to realize that your prioritization starts to shift. And so this concept of where you begin or what you prioritize and then what comes next, everything sometimes starts to get sequenced out. We even heard Heidi Hackemer refer to this about the beats. You know, you start to know the beats and then you do the beats. And so this idea of what you focus on first versus what you focus on second or third or next or last, or what you might just stop focusing on. This kind of prioritization is what led us to this concept of looking back at tools in a toolbox as, well, if these used to be a more of a message first approach based on persuasion, and now we're shifting towards better understanding salience, what we're now talking about is a memory first approach and taking a memory orientation around how we do the work, how we look back at our tools, how we counsel with our clients, and how we think about that being not only one of the most important inputs, but one of the most important outcomes that shouldn't be left to chance throughout the process of just hoping, well, we just hope this is going to be memorable, or we just hope we know how people enter into the category. We just completely skip over those concepts altogether. So uh, it became a working handle that we started typing into documents and into posts. And next thing you know, here we are, to your point, with this sort of grab bag of different memory first points of view or memory first tools like the creative brief, like the 4Cs model, like personas, as well as then perhaps a different way to prioritize the research going into informing any of those initiatives. Yeah, we've ended up with a statement that says, don't forget about memory. In fact, which is actually kind of funny to think about. Don't forget about memory. Make memory an unforgettable part of your process. But yeah, memory first. And and now our hope is in this episode is to start to string together why all these things work together and why it was an even important shift for us in the first place. But really, I think, and you can correct me, that it was a statement of prioritization and a reminder about a different lens to put on, whether using an existing tool or crafting a new tool, about what's most important to the input and then the end outcome of the process.
I think this also came from this idea that actually you can't analyze human behavior by thinking that the human or individual by itself is a black box. This is something that I will ask you after a moment. Like, what is the difference between human behavioral analysis and memory based analysis? But I think at the core, I think the biggest distinction is that there is actually a way how to understand individual, how to understand how actually people are learning the information and how people are actually remembering the information and storing the information and how actually the brain works, because we love to think that the brain is kind of like an archive where we can put in some sort of information and it's almost like a folder. So, you can pick it up, but it's not like that. It basically works as a forecasting engine. It's based on prediction. So it's constantly predicting the future, like what will be the next thing. At least probably my brain is now thinking what Christopher will say after a couple of seconds or minutes. And it's based on my previous knowledge about our interaction and my experience by, doing these podcasts. And the same goes for everyone. That's the way how the human brain works. And I think there have been a huge misconception in our industry based on this very key idea.
No, and this is where the conversation can get very meta in the sense that our own remembrance of what it is that we should be doing on any given day is based on our own behavior and the actual activities we're doing with our other practitioner colleagues on agency side, client side, which then causes a more constant refreshment and retrieval of certain memories in combination, which strengthens those bonds, which then creates literally this muscle memory about how you approach, projects. And there's a lot of great learning around this. Paul Feldwick in our episode with him, who admitted that he didn't even feel like he had permission to have an understanding of a different way for advertising to work until he got outside of ad land. Because while in ad land, conforming to the familiar vocabulary around his colleagues and with his clients, snuck in these little mechanistic assumptions, which then would force you to do a project this way or that way. He had to get out of that and start to learn and break that linguistic pattern to create new memory links. Phil Barden has a book called Decoded, which is a pretty famous book, I would say. It's been around for a while. There's a company called Decoded. And he, as well as a number of other colleagues, and again, I don't consider this to be like unique science to their discovery, but I think it's been also validated in other ways, is that when you get to the power of particularly shifting people's minds, they are being nudged to change over time, not because of the advertising and not prior to usage of the product, but once they've actually trialed the product, that's actually when those things are happening and refresh one another. And every time that memory is retrieved, it's updated a bit. And the more it's retrieved, the more durable it becomes. So it really shifts quite a few things when we think about how many of us used to practice in the past. Not only was I coming in message first, persuasion first, I was coming in hard brand first. Starting so many of the discussion guides, so many of the beginning of the projects of whatever, really focusing on, okay, what do people think about this brand? What does this brand stand for? What is the purpose of this brand? What are the imagery associations about this brand? Let's get people that free associate around this brand. It was always brand, brand, brand. Now, a brand is a memory, right? But the trigger to that memory that is brand is not the first thing that happens when people come into category. Memory first as opposed to brand first. People aren't starting first with brand in mind. That's a completely different way to practice. Now it's less about what do people think about the brand, and it's more about what gets people to even think about the brand. What increases the odds that the brand might even come to mind? What are those circumstances that one might be in, behaviors that they're engaged in, where suddenly they have an urge or a need or a job to be done, and that's just a different way to then get response out of someone.
You said that brand is a memory, but if we go back and think about that our brain is constantly kind of predicting the future, isn't in that context brand then a prediction? And distinctive brand assets are the stable cues who are actually helping to kind of remember the brand because it's stable, it's the same, it's familiar.
Yeah, those stable cues are increasing the odds that when you have a rare chance to ever have that brand come to mind, that somehow through the work that we've done, particularly in advertising, that we've increased the odds of that brand being chosen for that particular buying occasion. But that forecasting engine is, I think, a really interesting way to open up, anyone to what it is that we're talking about. That over time, through repetition, 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 increase the odds that the next time we come into market to have that choice to be made, that boom, we're increasing the likelihood of that brand being chosen. It's like how all these things come together. I think forecasting and predictive modeling. This is the language, these are the concepts that we should be much more fluent in and much more intentional with in how we design our next process or our next piece of research. If we could port in those concepts and build on top of those with, again, more of a memory first approach, a lot of what we do on an everyday basis would improve. We would be increasing our own odds of then going through the same set of behaviors and then conditioning ourselves to retrieve those same concepts about what we're doing in the market to do the same thing at scale with people making their own decisions.
I think it's very interesting to also think from our own perspective, like individuals, average consumers, by just taking myself back to my local supermarket that I love to kind of create some sort of like a list, a grocery list of things that I need to buy. And then I go to the store and I know what direction I should need to take to get those products. And I want to be as fast as possible because there isn't anything interesting to do in a very crowded place. But whenever I have moved somewhere else, I'm basically seeing the situation when I'm like facing a blank, like I am face blank. I guess that's the expression that I don't understand. I don't know these products. I don't know these stores. I don't know what I'm buying. And even now here in Berlin, a lot of these stores are trying to kind of replace the products around the store to create some sort of like surprise, I guess, moment for consumers. For me, it feels like I feel lost. My brain predicted that I need to buy this thing, that thing, and it will be there and it will take me, I don't know, 10 or 5 minutes to kind of get those things. And it will be super fast. If there will be a lot of people, it will take plus 5 minutes. But when the store is completely changed, my prediction is, falling apart. And if I'm after a long day of work, after a yeah, hard day of work, then I feel completely lost. Like it takes even more time for me to kind of push my brain to start to figure out like, hey, where is, I don't know, some fruits or some vegetables that I'm normally buying for my dinner? And I think that in a lot of cases, we can see actually in the daily life that marketers are kind of not understanding how a simple human brain works, that we don't want change. We actually want to have predictable things. We want certainty. We want to know where our food will be in our local store.
I think the grocery store metaphor and walking through a supermarket as a wonderful cognitive miser looking to just satisfy and not think and just feel and go with what they know is a great way to think about just the marketplace at that scale. Take that concept to anything. It's like, okay, I'm going to go make this choice again. Oh, why is this all different? And it throws you into that system two thinking. And next thing you know, people don't pick anything, right? They just fall into a form of paralysis or it just gets hard enough to where they say, you know what, I'm just not going to buy anything right now. And so apathy and just people defaulting out because it just got harder than it needed to be is another thing that marketers under anticipate.
Yeah, they are giving mental overload.
Right.
So what they would like, I think what they should need to think about is how to be more in a way of thinking about mental economy. So how it could be what would be the most easiest way for a consumer to find all these things that they are looking for? Similar with the campaigns. If the campaign is super novel and super kind of distinctive from the rest, what the brand has been doing for, I don't know, some time, then probably, yeah, it will attract some awareness for a moment. Maybe it will convert for a purchase for a moment, but it will definitely not create lasting memories.
I have a question for you, Baiba.
Okay, I wanted to ask the question about the behavioral analysis versus memory analysis, but okay, you can go first.
Well, I think this will segue into this because I think one of the more interesting conversations that you and I had on this topic now some months ago, where we really started to get serious about this, is a conversation you had with a professor, Vanix,
Yes, Max.
in which he started to blow your mind about what we know or what we don't know about memory theory, and that there is still debate about how memories are formed, which maybe you pick it up from there, and then we'll cross these streams of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that conversation wasn't like a pleasant one, to be honest. I think that that was the moment where I felt like, yeah, he's from, he's professor, he works in academia, and I am just a practitioner, and he kind of crushed my soul a little bit with that conversation because he was very brutal. I was trying to talk about human associative, this memory theory that is referred in Baiba's Institute books. And he was very harsh. First of all, he said, like, this theory is not very complete. It has its flaws. So you need to find, like, more updated, some sort of like theories or some sort of research findings that are actually kind of like poking the holes into that theory. And I was like, fine, that's interesting. And then I started to talk about like I think about the billboards, like or he brought up this context about the billboards. So the idea was that when we talk about the memory, we always talk about like, oh, if few people see the distinctive brand assets, they will consciously or unconsciously or subconsciously, they will start to build some sort of like associations with the brand. If a person sees the ad, for example, as a billboard 5 to 10 times, passing by, going through to their work or going to the shop or going whatever, just seeing the ad. It doesn't matter. There needs to be some sort of a moment where a person is kind of putting like mm, focused attention on that kind of information. So there needs to be some sort of like conscious focus on something to kind of be remembered. And then he also challenged me with the question about like this short-term memory and long-term memory. What do we put in the long-term memory? Only things that are actually very important to us. And then he was like, does the brand advertising on the street is actually important to you? Will you put it actually in your memory? And that was like very challenging question. I was like, yeah, for the short term, if there's like a good deal, probably people will quickly think about maybe I need to go and buy something, and that's for the short term campaigns and the short term sales activities. But then if we are talking about communication elements in our long term memory, consciously, I'm not sure. But then comes the question that we didn't discuss, which is about the consciousness and subconsciousness. And even Ehrenberg Institute, in their paper Mere Publicity, they are talking about that the biggest part of the memory is actually these associations that are stored subconsciously. So it's a lot about the low attention, not about the high attention. What the Vanex was talking about was high attention when we are actually focusing on the things.
Yeah, and in our world, it's all relative. One person's high attention or high emotion they'd put on one subject might be different than another person's attention, So take, for example, let's take it's an edge case, but, someone who's allergic to peanuts, right? Um, who's deathly allergic to peanuts. They are on all times and have been raised to be on high alert as to whether there are any peanuts around them, whether there's any peanuts in the food that they're eating, the candy that they're eating, the power bars, all the things that have lots of things in them all the time, the cereals, whatever they might be, the birthday parties. And they are on high alert constantly because it's literally an existential issue for them. Let's scale that down and compress that to things that aren't existential, but for certain people, for whatever reason, might have different relative levels of emotion or importance. And you're a parent, and there's an ad that is really addressing you as a parent that takes you nostalgically back to a memory of when you had, your young daughter sitting on your lap, and oh, you think about those days, and those days aren't there anymore, and like somehow that ad pulls you in and encodes that memory and then creates that. Again, just maybe just slight predisposition over time, but if through repetition over time, could be what's necessary to increase the odds that you're going to choose that brand because they've made a more durable memory structure. Meanwhile, the person next to you is not a parent. They didn't connect. That wasn't emotionally engaging. It just has a different probabilistic outcome on those two people. So it's that someone was designing for a certain audience, and that audience isn't always going to be the audience that is going to be exposed to that creative, and thus the intentions behind using that concept will be lost on some. And so trying to create things that aren't lost on the many, I think becomes the big opportunity when you move ahead thinking about availability being the core thing that you're trying to accomplish through reach to encourage penetration, which is like out of 1,000 KPIs, the only one that is predictive of growth, as opposed to another mental model, which is about making things very special and very different and narrowing and cutting and slicing and dicing, which then can lead you to outcomes that might be more intense for the few. But if you are excluding much of the category buyer marketplace, you are then by definition in lowering the odds that you're going to be chosen by more people across more buying occasions, which then is entirely counter growth. But the fact that so much of my professional career and my instinct was about narrowing, finding unique special things about unique special things, constantly obsessing over differentiation, and then trying to go find particular different audience that will somehow share values in that thing, and thinking somehow that if we wanted more of the pie, all we had to do is go bite off a smaller slice. Doesn't make any sense now when you put it that way. But back in the day, when that was the meat grinder that I was in, right? And those were all the people that I were working with and all the words and concepts and things. We've improved those odds that it's not going to be that way. That's the rut that you then fall into and the assumptions that, you then start to make. So high emotion, low emotion, durability of memories, how in a stochastic market, how some people individually might reflect differently than the market at scale. This is why empirical generalizations and generalized theories become our best friend because, again, it reminds us that we need to be activating more of the market more of the time, not just a few of the people every once in a while, through the decisions that we make.
I just went through once again the brand advertising as a creative publicity. That the paper that I was referencing. When you said and you were talking about the campaign that can bring, let's say, a dad into the memory about a daughter, what the researchers are saying in this paper, because there are a group of them, is that there's a kind of this gap between the moment you see the ad and between the moment when you could actually kind of engage and buy a real product. And because there is this gap between the exposure and between the activity, there's a little chance that the person will actually go and buy the product. You will just have this nostalgia, but you will not kind of go and buy the product.
Yeah, the deterministic action of like, "Oh my gosh, they really spoke to me as a father. Suddenly I need chocolate," right?
Mhm.
Or I think about this wonderful ad by Cadbury, which was never in the market that I lived in. I think, that probably a version for the UK and a version for Australia, but it is so well done, and I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Maybe we can link to it in the post, but it's this wonderful ad. It's at a gas station or petrol station, as they'd say in most of the world. And, I'll spoil it here, but, a young woman is behind a counter working at a petrol station, and this guy walks over to buy a Cadbury chocolate bar. And, you can see some subtle cues of you see the purple and things going on, right? And then, he buys it. And you can there's an interaction between the 2 of them that's sort of ambiguous what's going on here. You can tell that maybe they know each other, maybe they don't. And in the end, he buys the chocolate bar, and then he just pushes it towards her and just walks away. And then she says, "Thanks, Dad." But you can tell there's some, like, emotional tension there where they're like, they've not always been eye to eye. So much is happening in such a 30-second spot with so very little being said. But this little interaction between the 2, and it falls back onto this, like, half glass full generosity aspect that Cadbury's had in their work. It is so well done, and the cues are very subtle, but for a particular audience that sees this, like, emotionally, it is so heightened that I feel like I've got a little recording mechanism that's working harder. And I mean, that same bar and product isn't even, marketed in the US and that packaging, etcetera, but it's an ad like that. Again, little nudges over time, at what point I might have an opportunity to make a choice on chocolate. May they have increased the odds? Perhaps they have, but no, I would not see that ad and then immediately jump out and buy a chocolate bar. And I think, that's the client's biggest fantasy. It goes back to the banana pancake chart. If that marketplace actually existed, then yeah, perhaps they could instantly get a whole bunch of purchases out of that. But otherwise, it's these gentle little nudges that over time start to stack the odds to try and increase the forecasting ability that me, myself, when I have the choice, somehow for some reason, given that brand has provided an emotional advantage in that ad, which created a mental advantage that over a long period of time, perhaps increase the odds. And that's the best that we can do is simply increase the odds over time.
Yeah.
Back to, the behavioral analysis question here. The idea of that behavioral analysis really asking excuse me, asking and trying to answer the question, what people did, what people actually did, as opposed to a memory first approach about what people can actually retrieve. There becomes like a relationship here, right? So a memory first approach over time in this example we just gave about that particular Cadbury ad was trying to increase the odds of perhaps maybe even when um, chocolate is being gifted as some kind of unspoken way of saying, I care about you, or chocolate as a gift where someone is trying to, I don't know, convey a certain amount of affection with a confection. These observed actions in market of what people actually did and the behavioral analysis of what people actually did is exactly where the law-like patterns live. Penetration drives growth. Repeat rates largely scale with brand size, as some people like to call loyalty, et cetera. Those things are just elegantly repeated time and time again in markets at scale. Meanwhile, the memory first approach is trying to increase the odds of those kinds of positive outcomes across those true units of measurement of purchase penetration, repeat rate, whatever it might be. But a memory first approach is coming in to try to, again, make certain that the right kind of choices are being made in market, that those few things that marketers have control over to try and over time lead to those behavior changes that then get analyzed in post. It's the memory retrieval pieces in the beginning that, again, too often we just skip over. We just skip over them. I mean, how often have you just started a strategy with like, we need to drive awareness or we need to drive sales? Immediately, we're speaking in the language of outcomes that can be measured, and then we skip over all the proper inputs that might be necessary to actually accomplish that. Or we go straight to brand. What do people think about this brand? And we write a brief about here's how they currently think about this brand, and here's how we would like them to think about this brand. When really nobody's thinking about the brand at all. But our creative brief is created in this fantasy world as if that's all people are thinking about in this very brand first way. The simplest way to contrast them is behavioral analysis tells you whether you've won as a brand with these kind of true points of measurement. But memory first tells you whether you're actually likely to be in the next race at all in those rare occurrences when someone actually comes into market. Memory first diagnostics and memory first approach, memory first research approach, which we're going to be doing a webinar coming up soon. It's about asking those questions first in the process. Are we strongly linked to the key buying situations? So again, if you want to be insightful, and insight is important, think about incidents. And are we strongly linked to those primary category entry points? And are our brand assets reliably cueing the brand to, again, create a more perfect forecasting engine in the mind of the customer to when they have a chance to make a choice that, in fact, you've increased the odds of your brand being on that list.
Yeah. Because for me, it's like, when I did my own research 5, 6 years ago, and I interviewed a bunch of strategists across the globe, I also touched the topic about the research and how do they approach the research when they are doing as a strategist. And there were a ton of questions that people were normally sharing from where they start to think about the strategy. And when I went through the list now for preparing for our Memory First, the research webinar, I was like, these questions are all focused on how to understand human behavior from the outside.
Yeah.
Like, the human is like a black box. And then there were, of course, a bunch of smart ass strategists who were like, but the real question is like, why? Because behavioral analysis doesn't answer the question why. Why do people do this? Or why do people buy these products versus those products? And actually, we can't and we will never understand these things if we are not actually having a real conversations with these people and how they learn the information about the brands or categories.
I had a great conversation yesterday with a qualitative researcher who I've known for a very long time. And to hear from her the importance of bringing into her practice the quantitative piece, really the recognition that you can go into a room and have a really deep, fascinating conversation with a small group of people, or ideally maybe even one on one. And at what point you do that enough, you feel you've reached some point of diminishing return. And so that's perfectly answering the classic like planner strategist, often dream desirable professional circumstance. I mean, so many of the strategists that you and I interact with, they love those moments, the social scientist and liberal arts major in them and all the story things and all of that. But if you don't take that next step and then determine from that what actually scales to the market, you're then making perhaps one of the biggest mistakes, which is you've just found a very anomalous, small idea that doesn't scale, right? And taking that next step to get to market scale to actually see what of this might actually, let's just use a word I'm not a big fan of, resonate, right? But what of it actually includes more people than it excludes, right? What is most inclusive about what you've just learned that actually invites more people in, as opposed to exclusive about it that leaves too many people out. And the idea of leaving people out and being much more exclusive with our thinking and much more exclusive with our marketing, strangely, was the unquestioned guidance that I operated off of way too often. And again, it was born out of a Cotlerian toolbox where it was about slicing and dicing and being more meaningful for the few, suggesting that there are such things as better customers that we can own, God forbid. And when you're operating with that mental model, then just like your hammer and you're looking to pound every nail, right? Like, and you're not approaching from a market perspective. And I think we would argue that market orientation is memory orientation, at scale and trying to understand category buyer memory at scale and what we're up against. That becomes the Manhattan Project we should all be looking at as an industry and are rebuilding our toolboxes around. And that's why we're talking about a memory first creative brief, why we're talking about a memory first 4Cs approach, why we're talking about memory first personas, why we're doing webinars like memory first research approach. And that portfolio and set of tools is going to accumulate over time. And that's a point of view you can bring to an existing tool you have, or we can build new tools around them that again bring in more of that memory first approach. So, I mean, that's the exciting part of this is that if you're someone who's been in your career for some time or even better starting out, there are maps for these territories and different ways by which to practice. And you're either in the know or out of the know on these. Meanwhile, here you are in the messy middle. And so are you going to be fluent? Are you going to be bilingual in these two dialects and how they make very real practical impacts in what it is that you do on any given day? So it's an exciting time to be a part of brandLingual. And it's something we'd love for more of you to join us over time. But if anything we've talked about in this conversation is even remotely intriguing, confronting, engaging, realize you're not alone and there's lots of other people talking about these things at brandLingual and find a way to join us in our next webinar or take our next course as well. Again, we're not just a podcast.
I think this needs to be our slogan. Tagline.
BrandLingual,
Branding, we're not just a podcast.
period. Right.
Yeah, but
That's
I think yeah, but I think what you said about that, market, share concept and, memory, I think that this comes from brand health, where I think at the very beginning of the book, Jenny is saying basically that your, market share is basically the mental market share. How many minds can you actually bring to your brand? How many people can remember you? Not even think about your or I don't know, buy you, but even remember that you even exist as a brand.
Yeah, the strong correlation between mental market share and actual share of market, once you see those correlations, they're hard to look away from. And then you go back and you look at your funnel tracker that you've been spending a bunch of money on, and you look at your discussion guides, and you look at all the way that you've been measuring things, and you're like, wait, we don't have mental market share. Maybe at best, you've got maybe different flavors of awareness, top of mind, unaided, aided, and then you've got consideration, and oh, and there's always a drop off, and there's certainly a big gap between there and preference. And then you ask, well, we need to fix this. All right, what are we fixing? Well, we need to fix our conversion of consideration or preference from awareness, depending on the vocabulary. Okay, what are we going to go do? Well, we're just going to go make more ads. Well, what kind of ads? Well, the same ones we've been doing. Or worse, something entirely not like the ones we've been doing. Let's do something that looks completely different with different cues and different brand assets. And then you just keep going off on this sort of blind adventure. We're just trying to increase awareness. We need to convert more to consideration. But if you ask anyone around you, so what are you doing specifically to accomplish that? I bet you're gonna find a bunch of blank faces. And then you might find someone who's nerded out with the tracking study vendor, who says, well, there's these particular image cues that we need to dial more into our advertising because there's a higher propensity that people that perceive a brand as being trusting or this or that, will lead to that conversion. And then you learn that really, if you just took that same data and you resorted it by size of brand, you'll always find that the big brands are more trusted than the small brands, and that there's no such thing as a small brand that has more trust than a big brand. And then you follow down that pathology using evidence-based thinking, and you find out again why, because of trial, I've actually used the product, I've interacted with the product repeatedly, and through that engagement, that is the one thing that has probably built up those imagery associations across more people because more people have used the brand that's the biggest brand. And then you find it's just purely an artifact of brand size. That if you want to be the more trusted brand, be the bigger brand. Yeah, and so messaging your way as a small brand with trust isn't going to be the thing to do that. Essentially, you need more customers to interact with your brand over time to then perceive you as the bigger one, the more familiar one that everybody seems to be using, queuing, social proof, and all this stuff that then leads to those outcomes. What do we then do about awareness to conversion issues with consideration? Let's talk about category entry points. People know your brand, but you are simply not doing a good enough job of increasing the odds of your mental market share across very important category entry points that are driving category growth, and you're not being thought of for those entry points for enough people. It's then fairly obvious as to why you're not growing. And in fact, if you are being linked to those very small category entry points that aren't contributing growth to the category, that's also why you're small. So now we need to expand the number of category entry points that we are credible for, that we are popping up more often for. And now you actually have a very real way, intentional way to go to market, an intentional way to create your advertising, an intentional way to orchestrate all four Ps, and even select more relevant media moments that more closely align with purchase behavior. So now you actually have a plan that you can set forth into market. There's a different way to do the research. There's a different way to measure it over time. Again, a lot of this is written about in Jenny's books. And yeah, it's a much more intentional way of just, "Oh, okay, well, of course we're in the awareness game." And then nobody does anything any different. Or they use bad data to try and make the next best decision. But yeah, tracking back to, share of mind and share of market are very strongly correlated. And it's hard to buy things that people have never heard of or remembered. So again, it comes back to we're in the memory making business, and it's a battle for the mind over time in a probabilistic fashion with little nudges with our the best weak force elements we can bring to industry. And that's a different toolbox. That's a different way to go to market, and it's memory first.
I want to just say that in brandLingual, we have a brand simulator where everyone and anyone who will participate in our programs will also be trained to understand these market patterns, how the big brand should need to, or market leader should need to operate in the market, how a middle-sized brand should need to operate in the market, and also how a niche or small brand should need to operate in the market. And I do believe that any strategist or practitioner in marketing should need to understand what is the difference between all these three sizes of brand.
To Baiba's point, 100%, the Coffee Wars simulator allows you to see your own brand in one of these brands. You know, you're probably either gonna be a small, a medium, or a large. We believe most likely people are going to be in the mid-size level, maybe the small, but there are similar mistakes, that can be made by brands of different sizes. It's just that some of those mistakes hurt more when you're smaller than they do when you're bigger. Sort of a benefit of double jeopardy for big brands is that they have more resilience in what they're able to pull off, and thus there are bigger mistakes you could make sooner rather than later as a small brand. But to be able to see those differences and to simulate those different outcomes through our coursework material, as well as some interesting probabilistic games and that we're starting to mix into our course curriculum, allows for immersive, playful ways, you know, to really see in fun ways how these fundamentals can play out in very predictable ways. You know, they're not perfect, you know, obviously, you know, we don't have a crystal ball to help every single brand specifically make a specific set of choices. But again, the generalized theories are increasingly more confidence building. I've seen in, for Baiba and I and brandLingual, even making decisions, you know, for brandLingual as well as many colleagues working with, when they can walk into any room and understand the power of the banana chart or the NBD and realize that there are law-like patterns that we can rely on. There's a confidence that comes along, you know, with that. And whether you're a small, medium, or a large brand, the NBD applies to you whether you like it or not. And so you should know that. And now that knowing that then should give you confidence to make, more firm choices moving ahead. So the simulator is a great way to start to play through some of those role play scenarios with brands that are outside your category, that are unlike you, which gives you a chance to exhale. But all the things that we're talking about directly apply to every brand. So it's gonna be very easy for you to then see yourself through these choices and these decisions.
I will just warn that I think first will come cognitive dissonance and then will come confidence.
That's an excellent point. It's like no pain, no gain, and you have to feel that unlearn burn, you know, feel the learn, uh, because, there are some big slaps in the face on certain things, particularly when it comes to topics like loyalty and brand love, which we even sense in our own webinars, and when we do that, we can sometimes watch the faces of the people that are on the webinars when, Baba starts talking about the relative importance of these concepts and how predictable some of them are.
But actually, like, we are talking about things that Theodore Levitt was talking about in 1960s. It's like 70 years ago, marketing myopia. Now I know how to pronounce the second name of the title, a second word from the title, sorry. But anyways, that's nothing new. It's like the world is waking up, like the industry is waking up to something new, but actually those things are age old.
Yeah, it's like the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed, which I think is often attributed to William Gibson who said that, but, yeah, there's an opportunity to become more fluent and immersed in these concepts, which we do believe brings far more confidence to your position as a practitioner, regardless of where you, you know, where you practice, agencies, side or brand side. And these are the things that once you start to realize, wait, they've always been out there. To Baiba's point, they date back to some discoveries from the 50s, and these really strange patterns persist resiliently across all categories. And like that's when you see something like that, there's something going on. You need to tune into that. There's something powerful there that you haven't accessed. And it's once you see it and learn it, it's hard not to see, you know, moving ahead, but it can be quite confronting for the first time.
Here, I was preparing for this conversation. It's Alan Hedges, like testing to distractions. He's talking, this booklet is from 70s. And in this booklet, he's already talking about low attention. And now it's becoming a thing in our industry. It's just like, hey guys, it's 60 years since Alan Hedges was talking about this. And Alan Hedges was the one who influenced the Andrew Eckenberg. He admitted this fact on AdMap as in essay that is published on AdMap. So for me, it's like all these things are linked and they are all published and they are all somewhere out there. It's just where are we chasing after the next shiny thing trend?
Yeah, we're on the surface and we're not down, focused on the core, and we've forgotten about unchanged man, and we've skipped over the fundamentals. So a whole other reason, memory first is about prioritization. And so when you take a memory first approach, it's bringing you back to step 0 to 1 and focusing on that as opposed to jumping way ahead and talking about brand imagery and brand love and brand this and brand that. And again, it just kind of reorients us to where the market actually is and that category buyer memory at scale. So memory first, memory first. It's the world of salience. If persuasion and message first have a role, it is more in when it comes to physical availability. It has everything to do with, say, like the long and short concept of Binet and Field or future demand and current demand that James Herman speaks to. It's all about the short, the current demand, or the physical availability. Is where more of a message first or persuasion first cue could be more effective. And really, only effective and efficient if, in fact, the long prior to that has been played with salience, with lasting, durable memory making, using emotion as a means to encode memory, not as an outcome of brand love, but as a means to increase the odds of a message and brand being retained in memory. And so, by playing a memory first approach and having a strong memory first toolkit to play that long game, realizing that the persuasion message first then thing can only be more impactful in that short or physical availability moment. Again, now we're back to balance, right? Which is so often, in moderation, the best advice for anything. But when you jump straight to the bottom of the mythical funnel, when you jump straight to just persuasion first, you're missing the biggest piece of the puzzle that most strongly correlates to market share, that most strongly predicts future outcomes. And that's the piece that we just need to remind more people to start with again and again and again, hence memory first.
So yeah, guys, if you are listening and you want to join us next week, we are doing this will be this week because the episode will be launched on Tuesday. We are doing Memory First Research webinar on March 12th, two time zones, 7 p.m. Central European time, and I think it was 6 p.m. as Tom said to me, Chicago time.
Tom Elmar, marketing prof. Yes. Chicago.
Yeah, it's what is that time zone? It's like Chicago's.
Yeah.
So now I know it's a Chicago time. So
Yeah, and if you're listening to this late and you missed the live broadcast, we do offer all of these webinars as recordings that can be downloaded after the fact. So whether it's our 10 myths to unlearn in 2026, our memory first brief webinar, which was definitely our most popular one and perhaps one we're going to do again with some updated content, our memory first persona workshop, as well as our memory first 4Cs approach. And now with our memory first research approach, we have a whole suite of webinars that are little peeks in, little appetizers that are peeks into our 8-week course material and our field kit custom coursework that we can do for companies of different shapes and sizes that have been reaching out. And of the interest has been in this adaptive way of thinking. But again, whether you're an individual learner or a group learner, you can download these videos after they've aired. You can join us live. Always more fun to be presenting to a live audience. And we've got really great Q&A. In fact, one of these webinars, we went an additional hour longer in just the Q&A because the audience was so engaged and we had a really great interaction. So yeah, please do join us at brandLingual. More information at brandlingual.co as well as on our LinkedIn page.
so, maybe let's put a dot here and let's keep some open questions still there so we can do a part two on memory first approach to reflect on today's thoughts. And what can I say? Thank you, Christopher, for helping me to learn into my gaps that I have in my own thinking.
Well, and thank you, Baiba, for always refreshing my memories on the importance of a memory first approach. And perfect example of the more that you and I talk and train and teach on this subject, it actually creates more durable memory structures about our own practice. So conceivably, each time you tune into one of our podcasts, we are even more confident and we are even more intentional about what we're doing through this constant repetition. So again, look forward to seeing you again in our next webinar. Cheers.
Nice rest of the day.
Yes, and good afternoon into the evening for you, Baiba.